Welcome to another episode of 3 Men in a War Game. I am your new first talking host, Kevin, and I have my two co-hosts with me, and they will introduce themselves now.
I'm Paul.
Wow, that was abrupt. I'm Chris. I was expecting more.
No, we gotta keep our audience on the toes. We can't keep the same.
That's right. You gotta keep me on my toes, apparently.
Yeah, can't keep that same jokey nonsense if we're gonna change the first person who talks. Fellas, it's been a couple of minutes since we recorded hobby progress. Paul, why don't you go first?
Tearing through some conquest stuff, that's for sure. I am, let's see, I just finished up my last 4 models for my slingers unit, which is exciting.
So you have a full 12 slingers?
Yeah, all painted up, ready to go. And I also started, let me talk about the slingers first. The mass battle games, after not painting mass battle games for a while, it's a different world. But, the slap chopping has been fantastic and super helpful. The other thing I learned is that I need to, just for my own sanity, I have started doing, since they're repeated sprues, they have, 4 bodies of each thing. So I've been doing the same body at the same time. And what I discovered that does for me is that actually allows me to say, oh, okay, I need to hit this spot. I missed this spot. It's in a weird, angle. I didn't notice it on the other guys. And then I can go back. So I can touch them all up at the same time and knowing the bits that are in the spots that might be tougher to get, instead of from jumping from one pose to another. And that's been super helpful.
That's exactly how I did my Boltons, actually. Mm-hmm. It was always like sculpts with like sculpts for that same reason.
Yep.
Just interesting.
It's really made it easier.
That. Yeah, definitely. And on the Conquest subject, how's the playing of Conquest going?
Oh, it's going fantastic. Been playing with Potter, also played with another local guy, Jonathan, who's playing City States. That was a lot of fun.
Maybe
Potter and I have realized that we probably jumped up to the larger table size at too low of a points value, but we were just excited. It's okay. We'll get that right next time. And I'm really liking it. It scratches all of the itches that I had hoped it would scratch. Has that fantasy feel to it, has that fantasy world to it, but is its own thing. So there's a lot of gameplay to it. It's definitely easy to learn. Definitely difficult to master, and there's so many moving parts in a good way. So early experience playing the game, it has been very good. What else did I do? Oh, the other thing that I did outside of Conquest, I finished a entry grade Gundam, so that was exciting.
Sweet. Potter.
I have not gotten to do a lot of painting because I've been doing a ton of building. So I built my Athanatoi, however you pronounce them, one of the new units for Old Dominion. All these, Byzantine Roman names, I have no idea how the hell to pronounce them. I built half of Paul's Nord starter box. So that way we could try and make it to a demo day that we did, at one of our friends Bob's barn day. We were supposed to have a little bit more, but unfortunately it's due to some sicknesses. A lot of people weren't able to make it. And then I built some of the dwarves again for said barn day. So I've been doing a ton of building. I've taken a break because it was a lot at one time. Then also, as you mentioned earlier, I've unfortunately had some unforeseen issues I had to deal with. Somebody decided they wanted the back end of my rental car. So I had to deal with that.
Whoopsie.
Yeah, right? So Had to buy a new car, had to do all that stuff. So taking a little bit of break, playing a lot of Jedi Survivor, which is kind of itching my need to play some Legion and build some clone troopers. So that I might see some of that in my future as well too.
Nice. All right. For me, not a ton, you guys. It's been not super busy on the hobby desk time for me. It's fine. I actually have gotten more through my cleaning process that I went, I detailed out like 6 or 7 weeks ago on the podcast.
Yeah.
And so the desk is actually mostly clean now, and there's only 4 models on it. So that's actually nice, so that focus level can be there. It's just been weird. I've been doing more stuff with the kids. One of those actually is a really cool thing. One of our local shops started a Magic the Gathering Commander Pre-Con League. Whew, that's a mouthful. But so how that works is like everyone in the league bought a Commander deck, and for the first 2 weeks, all we could play with is the Commander deck right out of the box to get used to the deck. And then after that, in 2-week cycles, we'll each get to we basically have to register our deck list with the guy who's running the league. And then every 2 weeks we can add $20 worth of singles. So we take the TCG player low price and we can add $20 worth of singles to upgrade our Commander decks. And we're going to do that through the entire summer. So
that's fun.
So we'll start with like base power, like plain vanilla Commander decks, and then sort of tune them to our liking over the summer. And Ezzy is also joining me, my older daughter. So she picked a red and black vampire deck, and I have a green, black, and white poison deck. So good times.
I like her style.
Yeah, man. She loves the vampire aesthetic. And when I showed her this like Rakdos black red vampire deck, she was like, yep, that's what I want. And it was funny. Her first game, she didn't say anything. We were like, I just want some friendly folks. It's her first time playing Commander. She's played a lot of Magic, but she's never played Commander before. And so we sit down, and like a third of the way into the game, she just like ruthlessly turns and starts bashing me and killing me. And she does actually take me out of the game. At the end of the game, she's like, I did the only thing I wanted to do, and that was kill my dad.
Your kid sounds as much of a sadist as mine. So I took mine this weekend to go paintballing, and we're on the same team. And he's sitting there talking to me, and I'm like, hey, I'm out of ammo. Give me some ammo. And he pops me some ammo, then turns around, shoots me in the stomach, and runs away.
The thanks we get. Yeah.
I kind of wish he had just shot you and been like, here's your ammo, and then taken off.
Right. Just you need some ammo? Here you go. Pop, pop, pop.
Yeah. I expect that of him.
But yeah, so I do have some MCP models on the desk, and also I'm getting ready for the topic we're going to go to. So let's transition into talking about Star Wars Shatterpoint.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Star Wars is life and all that stuff. So we're actually recording 2 days before Star Wars Day. So we missed it. We could have actually recorded, or no, it's tomorrow.
Excuse me, one day. We're slight hours away.
Hours away. So we are basically recording on May the 4th. It feels appropriate knowing that it is actually that much closer.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I thought it was the 2nd. And then as soon as I looked at my calendar, I went, nope. Yes. So appropriate topic for the day when we're talking about Star Wars Shatterpoint. And the reason I brought the date up is so that I can make a disclaimer about this. So the disclaimer is being that I have perused the rules once and read them once to make notes. And so this is coming off no gameplay experience and purely just reading the rules to make sure that I understand the flow of the game, and then basically working to sell the game to Paul and Chris in our normal format. And so I just want to make sure that disclaimer's out there that I'm not claiming to be an expert on this game by any means. Like, there's a very good chance that I'm going to skip some stuff or get some stuff wrong. But we're going to get the main, I think, feel of the game out and talk about the things that are exciting to us, or at least the things that were exciting to me when I made these notes. And talk about why we think this is going to be such a cool game, which is, again, Star Wars Shatterpoint by Atomic Mass Games.
And
so
again,
before we get started,
Kevin, in some full disclosure there, I did read what you wrote down. and did look at it in the rulebook, and I have perused it quickly previously as well. So
no, that's good. That's good. I mean, that means that like you'll be able to catch me on a couple things if we need to. All right, so let's
I'll do my best.
Dive right in. So going over the main points of the game. So like our main bullet points that we like to go over for a game. So this is a skirmish style game. And as near as I can tell, it looks like it's going to be 8 bases per side on the average. And I say 8 bases because some bases have 2 or 3 models on them. So it's really hard to give a models per side average, but in terms of activations, it looks like it's going to be 8 activations per side at game start on the average, because you have a primary unit, a secondary unit, and then a support unit. And it looks like generally the main unit is a person, the secondary is a person, and the support unit is two bases. But obviously they can mix that up, right? It's not hard and fast. So what I actually wrote in the notes is it's probably going to end up being 6 to 10 bases per side. That's going to be like the range probably as they get more releases out there.
No, I mean, that makes sense, right? Even with what we've seen so far.
Yeah, and I kind of like the idea that it might actually just be 8 bases per side. Like they may be always going for primary and secondary being single models, and then support units being like 2 or 3 bases. So it's like either 8 or 9 activations. Because of the way that the game works, and we'll get into that, I think that's actually pretty good. A pretty good way for them to sort of like activation lock at least the start of the game to like a specific number of activations per side before a reset.
Right.
So this is a game that's played on a 3x3. So I think this is at this point, if you think about skirmish games, this is kind of like the de facto, right? The 3x3 is the de facto skirmish size. 4x4 is large skirmish or infinity size. And then 2x2 would be micro skirmish like Eden or Bushido. So 3x3 pretty even with MCP, Malifaux, most of the games that we're familiar with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also for people who have their Mats by Mars and neoprene cut mats, that's the size most of us have anyway. So 3x3 is good with me. Yeah.
So is good with me.
Mm-hmm. So the activation style, I mean, 3x3 is good with me though. All right. So it is alternating activation, but fascinatingly, I don't, and you guys can stop me, and listeners also sound off in the comments or on the Discord here. I don't know of many other roundless games. Like this is a alternating activation game, but there are no rounds. After the first turn of the game, it's just alternating turns until somebody wins. There are no round resets. Period. So
yeah, I kind of like that.
Me too.
I'll be honest with you.
I really like it actually.
Yeah, I think for me it takes it takes a little bit of that. We have a limited amount of time to do this, and changes it to a far more Star Warsian. We're going to get the job done.
Yeah, but it also does another thing, right? And the other thing that I think that fascinatingly does is it completely negates activation control. So there is no out activating your opponent because it's always your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn. But there's an additional wrinkle when you get further in, because when units are destroyed, their cards are just pulled out, and you flip their card up, and if they're dead, it's not like you lose the activation. You just flip the next card. And so what happens is, as an opponent, you have to be really selective you have to be thinking about which models you take out, because if you take out someone's scrubs, for example, like let's say you're playing against like Anakin's forces, right? And you take out his clone troopers, that just means Anakin activates more often.
Mm-hmm.
So it creates this like really interesting mechanic in its roundlessness, in that A, there is no activation advantage, and B, the models that survive are having to work harder and activate more, which is really neat because you're actually putting yourself at risk more often too that way. So it comes off very well, and I think it makes for smooth and fair play. And it's going to make for some cinematic moments, which is important for, I think, a game that's with this rule set. I think those like cinematic moments are very important to it.
Yeah, I think I think that's important to the game in general, based on what it is. I mean, these are cinematic, strategic points in the Star Wars lore, the universe, and that's what a Shatterpoint is. Like, I like the fact that they've designed the gameplay to make these things so cinematic.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so the last thing we always like to talk about before we dive in deeper is how much terrain is required and what kind of terrain. And so this, I think, is my favorite words in all of wargaming is that it requires a large amount of dense multi-level terrain. I love that, right? Not because I have a large supply of sci-fi terrain, but because large amounts of dense multi-level terrain make for interesting gameplay scenarios.
Right.
And also pretty tables, right? Like one of the reasons we play these games is to be immersed in the pretty plastic and cardboard that we've put together, right? And so having these big cinematic looking and in Star Wars too, like if you think about the Clone Wars and you think about the battles that happen specifically in like Filoni shows, they are multi-level, very fast paced, lots of jumping around, lots of hiding behind corners. And so you want to be able to bring that to the tabletop and having one or two, like, because most war games, right? You think about Malifaux or even MCP, for the most part, it's really just 2 levels of terrain, right?
Right.
And here we're looking at 3 minimum and even 4 and 5 levels. And that's not to say sizes of terrain, right? But like really you're either on top of terrain or you're not in most games. And most of the time when you have terrain, especially terrain that's climbable, people just don't even climb it.
Right. They usually ignore it.
If you're playing, ignore it. You just go around it if you're playing a game like Malifaux, right? So it's really cool that the terrain is meant to be played on. And even so, and we'll get into it with the game setup. It's very much meant to be doing it. That's a segue right into game setup. So the way this game works, it's got a really very procedural games. And that's how, Crisis Protocol is like this too, right? One of the nice things about Atomic Mass in general is that they write very direct rules to their games, and it's very easy to follow them. I like this a lot. But the way that it starts is that you build your strike team, and your strike team is basically 2 squads and a mission. And so a mission is a mission card and then 3 decks underneath it. And so basically what that boils down to is your mission card, which tells you effectively what the mission is and how you place the objective markers. And then there are 3 decks of struggle cards that are labeled 1, 2, or 3. And so once the first player is figured out, that's the person who chooses the mission. They choose their mission. And then once the mission is chosen, that's the 3 cards. So it's not like a complicated process. So you're not like in MCP as an example, you're not like bringing 2 different decks of 3 cards, flipping them up, choosing one, choosing the other. Once a mission is selected, that's it from there. And even going to like Legion, where you have to do this like sort of mini game before you start about how the game is set up, about how the objectives are set up, about how the weather and all that shit is set up. It's none of that. The mission gets selected and then the struggles are based specifically on the mission. And so you have the 3 decks, you shuffle each of the decks, and then you pull 1 card from each deck without revealing them and stack them in sequential order so that once the game actually is started and you're going to be setting up the active objectives, you flip the first struggle over and that shows you which objectives are active for that struggle. And so that's the first part. So your missions and your squads your squad, and your squads are basically, you have 2 squads. Each squad is a primary unit, a secondary unit, and a support unit. And on this is cool. This is actually a lot like the other side. Each of your squads has a primary person, and that primary person has a squad allowance or an amount of points that they bring in, right? That they actually generate, and the other ones have a point cost. So when you select like General Anakin Skywalker as an example, he has 7 squad points, and that means he can spend 7 squad points on his squaddies. So he gets to pick up secondary unit support who have costs like 3 or 4 or 2 and 5 or whatever to equal 7. So when you're doing your list building, that's where your flexibility is. You choose basically the squad leader, and then you use that squad leader's point allowance to choose the secondary and support units that they can bring. And you get 1 of each. Makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep.
And I mean, it's super easy too, right? Like the thing I like about this, and I know we talk a lot about the importance of off the table play, but I think that a lot of the off the table play in this game is going to be how I could have played better. Not necessarily did I lose because I didn't list build correctly, right? I think this game is actually going to bypass that whole problem because of the ease of squad building. And you're going to be able to make some pretty cool and thematic squads.
Well, and I was going to say, I feel like like right out of the box, it's kind of encouraging you to play certain people together.
Sure. Yeah.
Which I think kind of helps for that. And I really hope that's kind of the spirit of the game in the wider community.
I hope so too, because that's not actually in the rules. The rule is that they have to be from the same era because it's a Shatterpoint thing, right? So they have to be from the same time, but not necessarily from the same side. So you could, for example, bring some traditionally bad guys with good guys as long as they're from the same era.
Oh, I did not realize that. I thought they had to be the same faction.
They do not. They do not. It's like Crisis Protocol in that way.
Gotcha.
In that they just want you to be able to play your models together. Yes, they just have to be from the same era. Now, that doesn't mean they won't ever change that, but that is the way that it's set for now. And I think for me, like, I am going to just like turn my nose up at tryhard games of this game. Like, it's just like, I have a competitive game. You know what I mean? I'm not going to mention it because it's a meme at this point, but I have my competitive game and I don't need to play this competitively. So tryhards be damned. If somebody's coming at me and I look at their shit and it looks like just like a genital stomping bad time, I'm out. I don't want anything to do with it. I'm just going to say good day, sir, play someone else.
Yep.
And I'm going to play my fluffy lists and have a good time, like recreating my Star Wars bliss, right? That's what I want.
Yep.
I agree.
But back to the game setup procedure. The next part of it is a roll off. And I know, Paul, one of your pet peeves of the war game is it's like randomly determine the first player.
Tell us how to do it. Just tell us how. Flip a coin, throw a beanbag, whoever's older. I mean, I don't care. Just tell us what you want us to do.
Yeah, and so it's actually it's a very procedural here. You roll a set of dice, defense dice specifically, and then the person with the most crits wins. If they're tied for crits, it's the most successes. If there's no successes, it's the most the next thing. Like, it's just like bam, bam, bam down the line. Like, there's a very strict procedure for the roll off.
There you go, Paul.
Which is good.
And it seems like
I like that.
I think they've tried to do it so that like 88% of the time it's just handled in a single roll. Do you know what I mean? Like, or maybe even a higher percentage than that. You roll the dice and you know who's going first.
Well, and that's how
MCP works.
MCP is, yeah. I mean, and it makes it so easy.
Essentially the same. Yep.
So easy. Paul can do it.
That's right. That is a correct statement, sir.
Man, it might be the D8s you roll too. I wrote the D6s and it might be the D8s. Either way, you roll the dice and then you go by the success levels of what they are, right? Oh, it is the D8s, and then it's crits and then successes and then the mastery dice or whatever that symbol is, the third symbol that I'll get to eventually, and then know the actual name of. The expertise, there it is. So that's how and it's basically you're just looking at who has the most and the breaking ties. So from there, this is what I think is cool. And the reason I wanted to go through the procedure is because like those parts that we just said, like building the strike teams, rolling off, setting the mission and placing the objectives, like all that's normal. But here's where it gets spicy, because you select the mission and then the mission shows you how to measure and place your objectives, which to people who have played MCP, again, this is going to be very familiar. You place your objectives, but again, there's not two overlapping sets now. It's just the one set of objective tokens that you're placing. So there's one card. You just place them according to the card. The card has the map for how to use the measuring tools to put them out and all that, yada, yada, yada. So here's where it gets really cool, is because after that is when the players collaboratively set the terrain on the board. And the reason that this is so cool is that when a piece of terrain overlaps an objective, you take the objective and you set it to the highest point above where that thing is sitting. So like if you maneuver the terrain so that the objective would have to go 3 levels up, that objective is going whoop right to the top of that 3-level thing, meaning that if you want to control the objective, you've got to go up to the top and fight for it.
Right.
Which, again, the cinematic moments, this is how you make them flow, right? You put the objectives in the spaces where it's not just on a flat ground, and you can't just like make a big gang up circle on it. It's got to be at a place that's harder to get to.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I think that's so cool. And then after that, you generate the will of the force. And so how this works is each unit in your strike team has a potential of bringing force points. They don't all, right? They don't all bring them, but a lot of them do. A lot of them will bring force points, and you get tokens that you can spend. And so these are like, it's just like, it's a coin basically, right? Where used or unused. And each cycle of your activation deck, you get that much force. And we'll go over what the force is used for. But so if your whole squad generates 10 force, you get 10 of these things that you can spend to activate abilities right up until you have to recycle your activation cards when they all flip back up to active again.
Now, are these like, do they regenerate? Do they once you use or lose? It's use or lose, but they do regenerate. So we'll get into it here. Actually, why don't we just get into it right now? Okay. So we're at the will of the force, and how this works. We'll go over all the stats for a unit and kind of how they work. But the abilities in this game, you know how when you're playing MCP, you're using points to activate your superpowers. You're using your power to activate your stuff. This game, all of the reactive and all of the active powers require some level of force expenditure, even if it's 0. And that's actually important for a reason we'll get into in a little bit. But generally, like force jump on Anakin Skywalker, for example, requires an expenditure of 1 force point. And so you get 1 activation of each unit per cycle through your deck. So the way that your deck works is every one of those units. So those 6 units we talked about, right? Because you have the 2 primaries, 2 secondaries, 2 supportings. Each of those have a card. And then there's also a Shatterpoint card. So your initial activation deck is 7 cards deep. And when you flip a card up, you activate that unit. Once that whole deck is gone, you recycle that deck. So you are basically removing all the units that are dead. And then you reshuffle and redraw on your next turn. And that reshuffle and redraw comes with a flipping up of your force points. So any ones that you haven't spent at that point, you kind of lose them, right? Because everything else refreshes. Gotcha. Okay. Makes sense.
So let me ask you this, and maybe this is getting further ahead than you were intending to at this point. Do you always start with the same number of force points, or do certain characters generate more, or how does that work?
It's certain characters generate more or less. So like Anakin Skywalker, as an example, generates 4, which is a high number, right? Yeah. Not everybody is going to bring that same 4 points of force. That's going to be a higher number because it's Anakin.
I mean, he's the chosen one, so.
Yeah, and like if you bring with him some clone troopers as an example, they're probably not going to bring. They bring 0. The 501st clone troopers bring 0. Ventress brings 3.
Yeah, I guess the main reason why I was asking that was because I was curious if, as units died, if that if you got that 10 points, would that increase, could you then expend a crap ton of them on Anakin? But
yes. The answer is yes. I don't, and I could be wrong, but I don't remember reading anything that says when a character dies, check for their force and remove their will of the force. Like you still get those force for the rest of the game.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. See, that's what I was curious about. But yeah, I guess that's something we'll have to confirm. Yeah. But yeah, that seems.
Yeah, because in my mind, I mean, like if Anakin dies, like that force that he generates dies with him. Like that's the way I would have thought it would have worked. And again, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
Right, because maybe when you
seeing that, yeah.
When you build maybe when you build your deck at the beginning of the turn, that's when you calculate your force points.
That
based
is
on what's
when.
going
That is
through.
when. No, that's what. Yeah. You once you present your force and your whole army basically, right? Your strike team,
Right.
and the total number of force that your strike team generates is your will of the force number. So that's how much force you're going to generate.
Gotcha.
Throughout the game.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm looking right now at Becoming Defeated, and it just says the order card is removed from the game, but there's nothing about removing that character's force.
Well, I guess as Anakin's sitting there as a Force Ghost, he's still giving you his...
Yeah, and the thing to remember, too, is that like units that don't generate force still require force to activate their abilities. So... That could feel that if you think about it, that could lead to some really feel bad mechanics if you lost your person that generated 4 force and then that prevented you from doing the most basic abilities on your normal units. Right.
No, that makes sense. And, again, thematically, because that's how I think about these things, it's you'd be looking at Anakin being pissed off that, Rex died and he's going to go harder. So he's going to burn more of that force skill.
Yeah. Oh, and here's another one for you. So Padawan Ahsoka is a secondary unit, brings no force to the table. Ahsoka Jedi No More is a leader, is a primary unit, and she generates 3.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So, yeah. So that's just to give you some more examples of how building those strike teams works. And how, then that's part of it. Like, picking your 2 primary units basically is going to have a lot of influence on how much force you're going to generate. Because those are going to be the units that generate the most force, probably.
Right.
I say that because I know, the Dathomiri witches are coming, and there's a pretty good chance all of those units generate force, right?
Right.
But also, it's also those might be cheaper units and their primary might have less point allowance because that's the way they balance them, right? They're less powerful on the whole, but they bring more force to activate more abilities.
See, so, I think that's one of my favorite things. And because Other Side did that really well, and you can adjust, the power of your commander and not have to worry about massive amounts of balance, because if they're really good, then they just don't get to bring as much stuff.
Right.
Exactly. And if you think about it, that is 2 levers they can pull on at squad building, right? Yep. Both how much force they generate and how many points they can expend for recruiting.
Yep. No, I like it. I think that is a great approach ever since I saw that in The Other Side.
Yeah, it's very, very, very smart. Very, very cool. So yeah, that's that, right? But before we get back further into the units, I do actually want to back up a little bit and talk about the game itself, right? Because yeah, it's cool to talk about the units and all the Star Wars stuff, but why are we here, right? That's kind of in what are we doing? And we talked about how you set your objective. And so I'm just going to use the example out of the rule book where effectively, if you look at the 3x3, the sort of vanilla mission that they show, there are 9 objectives that are equally spaced. So you have basically 3 rows of 3, right? It's a perfect square. Mm-hmm. And they are essentially evenly spaced across the board. If you were to divide the board, if you were to take the board and divide the board into 9 pieces, the objectives would be on each intersection of those lines. Do you know what I mean? So
yep.
Perfectly spaced. All right. And so when you flip the first struggle up, for an example, it might be the middle row is all on. So the one closest to me, the middle one, and the one closest to my opponent, those are all on. And then, and that's for both middle rows. So you have the cross that's turned on, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then the second struggle. So someone wins that struggle, and we're going to go over right after this how you win a struggle. You flip the next one over, and the next one, very cool, has 3 lit up. And the 3 that are lit up are on one side of the board in the corners, and on the other side of the board, there's only one, but it's the one in the middle. And so now all of a sudden you have to adapt your tactics and move to where the objective is. But as another wrinkle, the person who flipped the card is going to roll a dice, and the symbol on the dice is going to determine which one of those is the primary objective for this part of the struggle. And then that primary objective is going to be worth additional momentum. So like when you flip the card up, that you roll a defense dice in this example, and the defense dice only has 3 possibilities and there's 3 objectives. So one of those objectives is going to be the primary objective and the other 2 will be the tertiary objectives or secondary. And like, this is really cool, right? Because what that means is that the objectives don't stay static throughout the game. Like you're fighting over one spot, but like, and this is the thing is like, it's called steal the secret plans. And so basically what's happening is if you think about it thematically, that's that when it's in the cross section, everybody is looking for where those plans are or defending them. Right. And then as soon as you flip the next part of the struggle, the next part is called, we're going to need a new exit. And then that determines where the primary objective on that is. And then there'll be another part after that. Right. So the game will ebb and flow as to where you're moving. And it's not necessarily determined by where you're carrying the objectives. It's how the objective map is actually going to be set out. And you don't necessarily know because each one of these is from a deck, right? So there's going to be some number of struggle 1, some number of struggle 2, and some number of struggle 3. And so all you'll know is that it's the possibility of this in the first stage, this in the second stage, this in the third stage. So it's kind of like, if you think about like a World of Warcraft boss, like a multi-stage boss, but each time you fight it, it's like 1 of 7 different stage 1s, 1 of 7 stage 2s, and 1 of 7 stage 3s.
Like Nefarian.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense the way you put that.
And so that's the way the objectives are going to go. And I think that's going to make the game very dynamic to play. All right. So how do you win these? Like, what are we doing here? And so the only thing we know so far is for controlling objectives. And so, for controlling objectives, you are going to need to have a unit within 2. This sounds familiar for MCP players. Being within 2 establishes control and also being not wounded. So you have to have a healthy unit within 2 on the same terrain level. That's also important. They have to be on the same terrain level within 2. So if there's one up on a scaffolding and you're on the ground, you are not contesting. You got to be up on the scaffolding.
I do like that.
Yep. Very cool. And so here's another thing, guys. So there is a momentum ladder. And this is the spiciest part of this game. So it is, I think it's 17 spaces. So there's 8 spaces on either side and a middle space. And the middle space is where the struggle always starts. Okay. And when I say spaces, it's like places to put cubes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And I was right. It's 17. Okay. So there's one space in the middle and the struggle cube always starts in the middle. And then you always put one of your momentum cubes in the 8th space. So the space closest to you. You're going to set this thing on the table. So your side is closest to you. Your opponent's side is closest to them. And when the struggle resets, you put 1 momentum cube at the end. So basically at this point, it takes 7 steps for that struggle token to get back to your momentum tokens. Making sense so far?
Yep. I'm on board.
All right, cool. There are a couple different ways that those momentum things will move. So the first thing is for controlling objectives. At the end of every player turn, you guys, every single player turn after the first, the struggle token moves a number of spaces toward you equal to the number of objectives you control at the end of that turn.
Gotcha.
So every player turn, you're moving it. So like I'm going to activate Anakin, move Anakin. We count how many objectives I'm controlling. The thing moves toward me that many points.
What I like about that is that then you can kind of plan on scoring an objective and not be dependent on what your opponent does.
Yeah,
right?
There's some prediction.
You can still gain your ground.
Yeah, and you have to think about that push and pull on this ladder constantly, right? It's like a tug of war. This momentum piece is going to go back and forth. And you might be thinking like, God, if you're listening, let be like, Kevin, how on earth am I going to hold something for long enough for it to come all the way back to that 8th spot. Well, dear listener, though you can add momentum points to your track. So again, there are 17 spaces on it. Whenever one of your opponent's units becomes wounded or gains a wounded token, you add a momentum to your side. So basically that means every time you wound somebody, it makes it easier for you to win this part of the struggle.
Right, because then it's adjusting you from 7 or would you say 6 spots, 7 spots to 6, and then possibly
and then
to 5,
and then 4, and then 3. Yep.
Right.
Now, if the player moves if after the first turn, if the struggle token at the end of the turn is in the center space, both players add a momentum because there's like equal fighting going on, but time is running out, right? And so the aspect of time is that both players add. And so now it gets closer for both players. And then the catch-up mechanic, and this is a little bit of a confusing one, is after a player moves the struggle token at the end of their turn, if the struggle token remains on their opponent's half of the struggle tracker, the active player, so you add another momentum token.
Right.
So you're basically telling your opponent you got to keep at it. You know what I mean? Because I'm like fighting against what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about that too is that it just because you add a momentum to your tracker, that also doesn't mean that you're not necessarily any closer to winning. If that makes sense.
You're I mean, somewhat closer. You're basically like speeding up how the struggle will resolve, but you're not necessarily guaranteeing yourself the win on it, right? Like that ladder can pull back just as hard the other way.
Right. And even at that, if I put a momentum down and you don't have any, but you're on you're number 5, I've still got to pull it back 5 spaces and then get onto my side, even if I have 2 momentum. I mean, that's you're looking at, 11 spaces moved or 10 spaces moved, which is fairly significant.
Yeah. And I think what'll happen is unless there's a blowout, you're really going to be oscillating between 3 and 0 on either side. Like it's going to like push and pull, and it's going to be about timing your pull right to when you have the amount of momentum that you can push it over the edge. Because as soon as that struggle tracker would need to occupy a space that is one of your momentum tokens is in, you win that part of the struggle. Just bam, you win. You get it.
Right.
That goes to your side of the board. You reset and flip the next part of the struggle and activate those objectives, right? So you change the way the struggle is going to work. And the way the game works is the first person to win 2 struggles out of the 3 wins the game. So if you win the first 2, it's over. Game over.
Right. Yeah, so it's best out of 3.
Yep, best of 3. In one game, sort of, right? Best of 3 struggles in one game.
Right.
Because the mission is the 3 struggles. So what do you guys think of that? Like in terms of like a game structure, I really like it.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because when I saw a little bit of it being played out on some of the YouTube videos, when I saw that struggle tracker, the very first thing I thought was like, oh, it's like God tier.
It is like God tier.
And that was one of the most interesting mechanics to me from God tier. Like I had zero interest in playing that, but then I saw the momentum tracker. I was like, oh, that's a really cool, neat, interesting idea to add into a miniatures game. So I'm glad I'll be able to experience it, now playing Shatterpoint. So it's interesting to me. I'm intrigued. I want to try it out.
Yeah, it's very much like that. I think I would even go so far as to say they probably took a little bit of that from God tier, just like they took the forest building a little bit from the other side. But that's fine, right? Like the innovation is based on this is humanity, right? Like art is like taking something from before and refining it. So
imitation is the best form of flattery.
Yeah, and like it's not exactly like God tier because the way that ladder works on God tier is similar, but also pretty different.
Yeah. Agree. The concept is the same.
Yep, exactly. It's that push and pull, right? Push and pull of how the mission is going. But what I like about this is it's a compromise between the kind of missions that you have in a game like Malifaux, where it's like very specific, and then some hidden missions, and like very specific things you have to do, very specific missions, but also like changing them and having, so you have like these specific things you have to do, but also there's like a fog of war sort of in it, and also a dynamism, so that like just when you get comfortable in how the board state is set, it flips on you and changes you and forces you to adapt your strategy to the way that the next part of the struggle works.
Yep.
Well, the thing I do like about that, Kev, is that it doesn't allow one player to completely dominate, right? Because if you have complete and total control over objectives, and you know the other player could spend the next 2 hours fighting for that and not accomplishing anything, the fact that the objectives change prevents one person from just being able to be like, all right, I own these now, good luck getting them from me.
Yep.
100%, because they change round on round.
Yep. No,
that's actually something Conquest has done with some of their objectives, where the objectives don't necessarily move, but which ones are worth more changes.
Right. Which I think gets rid of one of your biggest complaints about MTP in the early days, was a lot of just like camping on objectives. And it's like, what's
grabbing
the point?
an objective and moving.
Yeah, like,
there's none of that here. That is literally not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Because like then you've got models that you took, and you're not playing with them because they're just sitting in the back, just sitting on an objective doing nothing the entire game, which is boring.
It is boring. You're not wrong. It is boring.
I mean, so making dynamic objectives like this is 100% a win in my book.
All right. So now that we know how we score and how we win the game, now I think it's appropriate to talk about the units that we're going to use to do that.
I mean, Anakin Skywalker. That's all you need. Okay, we're done.
I mean, he is pretty good. He has a reactive ability called "I'm going to end this."
as he should.
Yeah. So, okay. How this works is your model basically, we already talked about cost and how much force, and that's one side of the card, right? One side of the card tells you how many models are in the unit, how much force they bring, how much they cost, or how much allowance they give you. The other side of that card gives you a whole bunch of cool stats. One of the stats specifically is the keys and tags. So, you know, if you think about MCP, like when you're like looking at things like an X-Force model or whatever, an X-Men model. So you've got, like, as an example for Anakin's got Galactic Republic, Jedi, Force User, 501st. And that's important, right? Because other models might say target another 501st model, right? And do X.
Right.
And so that's cool that it has that level of granularity. Like, I really like that because that allows them to write. But to Paul's point, they want to like sort of encourage you to take certain models with other models. They can do that with these abilities, right? And with these sort of like tags. So another thing you get is a list of abilities, and you've got a couple different kinds of abilities here to talk about. And those are going to be your, so active abilities, reactive abilities, innate abilities, and signature abilities. And so an example of an active ability is force jump. You spend a force, you get to jump. Pretty cool. And then a reactive ability might be deflect. So deflect reads, after a ranged attack is targeting this character and is resolved, this unit may use this ability if the attack roll contained one or more failure results. Here, the attacking unit suffers 2 damage. So you get to choose to use the reactive ability after the shots have been taken at you. And if they had any fails, you cause damage to them, which makes sense. As a lightsaber user, you're very used to seeing them deflect shots back and hit guys with them, right? And so that is literally shown as an ability on Anakin's card. And then the signature abilities are like the big nasty stuff, right? They're like the ones that let you do like out of control things. And like, that's like where your hello there is going to probably be for Obi-Wan and stuff like that. So you've got your cool stuff like that. Now the other stats, and this is where we're going to talk about it. Like right now, my favorite part about this game, and a part that I really want to get your guys' first impression on this, because really threw me for a loop. So you have 2 health stats, all right? Stamina and durability. And how this works is your durability or your stamina stat is your higher stat. And so we're just going to keep using Anakin as an example because I'm looking at his card. His stamina is 11. And what that means is he can take 11 damage before he takes a wounded token.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Durability is how many injured tokens he needs before he dies or is taken out of the fight. Okay. But here's how this works. So if during any activation, like if during your own activation, you take enough damage such that you cross that stamina threshold, you take a wounded token and your activation just ends. Boom. Your activation's done, right? But when you flip a card over and you go to start activating a model, the first thing you do is a wound check. And what that says is, do you have a wounded token? If you have a wounded token, flip it to an injured token, remove all your stamina and one other status effect that you have on you, and then stand back up and get back in the fight. But for the rest of the game, you have that injured token. And so now you're injured, right?
Okay.
So
basically, you said Anakin could take 4 injured tokens before he's just done.
3. The third injured token kills him.
So basically, he's got 33 wounds.
Yep.
Basically. But the
there's
part
a
that
butt.
I think...
There's a butt coming.
The butt you might be missing here, Potter, is though you don't check for injured tokens until the end of a model's activation.
Right.
And so here's why that's important. It's my opponent's turn. My opponent shoots my Anakin and does those last 4 wounds. So I've taken my 33 I've taken my 11 stamina and he's given me my 3rd wounded token. I start my activation, I flip it to injured, I still get to activate.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, because it's not until the end of
your activation that you check for the injured status. So you always get a last gasp activation with every one of your units.
Oh.
So
I think that's super fun.
I love it, Kevin, but I feel like there's another but, and it's the but to the downside of being injured.
Well, go ahead. Go on.
So for each of those, what are they, wounded tokens?
For each injured token, yep.
Yeah. Each one of the injured tokens, you spend that much more force to do your abilities.
Oh.
Every ability costs N more to activate, where N is equal to the number of tokens that you have on you. But that makes sense, right? Because the more damage you take, the harder it is to focus on the things that you're good at.
Yep, that's thematic. I like
Plus,
that.
You're tired, you're frustrated. I do. Once when I looked at that initially, I thought that was a really good touch. I think that actually works better than what they did with MCP, just because I feel
this is
like
the evolution. I think they are probably not happy with MCP currently. Like, not that they're not happy. I think they're very proud of that game, and that game works exceptionally well. But I think this is like they had this aha moment, and this is the next version of that same system.
Right, and that's what I was going to say. I feel like maybe the MCP version doesn't deliver quite what they thought it would.
Yes, but this will.
I think initially the expectation was pretty high because we saw several people in the core box that came out with different abilities and different things happening on the wounded side of the card, but there's not really a whole lot of that in the game, which I always found fairly disappointing, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you. And especially in the hindsight of seeing this system, right? It's like, it's basically like now I can't unbreak the glass. Like now I'll always be like, oh, but the system in Shatterpoint is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
So again, Paul, when am I giving you my MCP models?
Anytime you want. Anytime you want.
I love MCP. I'm not going to stop playing MCP. I was actually planning on teaching it to Ezzy this week because I still haven't. Bad dad that I haven't taught her it yet. But, you only have so much time in the week.
Yeah. No, I'm not getting
and your kids,
MCP.
And your kids only so interested in your stuff. But this is a very cool system. Like I wrote, and you guys can vouch for this. I wrote probably my favorite thing in the game. This like stamina and durability thing. I think it's so
right here.
Cool.
It's right there on the show notes. I'm looking
right there in black and white.
Yeah. I really, really like this. It's so thematic and it just works so well. And I do like that, like they give you that, like being tired, but also like you can't really get alpha struck off the board in this game, or even like beta or sigma struck, right? Like you like there's no delta strikes either. Like you literally have to take all of your damage and then you still get one activation.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting.
I do like that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting when it starts like introducing characters that potentially could like heal too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely. Like
I see Luminara coming in with an ability like that.
Boy, I think removing injured and wounded tokens is probably out of the question. That's probably like, whoa, no. But removing wounds, certainly.
Yeah, like you were saying, like, it's your opponent's activation. Anakin's got 3 wounds left. If they miss, and then you activate a model, your next model, which has the heal ability, you can take like 2 of those wounds off of Anakin, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, like the heal in MCP that they have, like the tag team heal thing. It doesn't fully heal them. It just gets rid of some.
There are heals, and actually, Anakin's signature move is based on if he wounds an opposing model. If he wounds like an opposing primary unit model. So like if he's fighting Darth Maul and wounds Darth Maul, every allied Galactic Republic unit that's like that can see him heals one.
Oh,
because they're like, yeah, right? Like that's actually an ability on the card.
I like it. Except for the fact that I'm probably going to play Maul most of the time, so I don't like it.
I mean, dude, Maul seems real good, and Maul's got some heinous abilities. So that's the models, right? So that's how that works. So let's get into a little bit of the sort of like key stuff here, right? Oh, also, I didn't mention tactic abilities at all. Oh my god, I feel like a bad host. One of the things I said is that you at the beginning of your activation, you flip your card up, you do your wounded check. One of the other things you do is check for tactic abilities. So tactic abilities are basically they're like innate abilities. They're things that you do, but if you have a tactic ability, you just resolve it at the start of your unit's activation. So if your unit has one of these tactic abilities, you just get to do it every time they activate at the start of their activation. So that's another style. So it's the active, reactive, innate, tactic, and identity, or special abilities.
Sounds good.
Yeah, super neat. All right. So how does a turn work? Right. So we talked about you flip up, and now we'll talk a little bit about this. So there's some randomness here, right? Because you're going to have 7 cards in your deck when you start a game. You're going to shuffle them and reveal one. What happens if you don't want to activate that model? Well, you can spend one of your force points to put that card in reserve. So you set that card to the top. That card is in reserve. Now you flip the next card down and activate that card. And then on subsequent turns, you flip a card and you can choose to activate either the one that's in reserve or the one that you flipped, right? But you can only ever have one in reserve. So you have to activate that model that's reserved before you can reserve another one.
Yeah, that I think is my favorite thing about the game. Because it stops you from getting feel bad moments.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you a little more agency over the randomness, right?
When I saw that, I was like, this is my favorite thing. That's the one I enjoy the
nice.
most. Yeah.
But one thing that I didn't realize until I read the rule book, I don't know if they revealed it early and I missed it or whatever, is there's an extra card that always goes into your deck. That's the Shatterpoint card, and that's a wild card activation. So when you flip up the Shatterpoint, you just get to activate whatever unit you want.
Wow, so that's pretty cool.
That's strong.
So you get your activations plus your Shatterpoint activation, which is pretty cool, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And thematic to what the Shatterpoint's about, right? It's exactly the person doing exactly what they need to be doing. So that's cool. I like that a lot. So you flip it up, you do that, then you activate any of their tactics things, you check if they're injured, yada, yada, yada. So then you get to do it's just like MCP, you get to do your 2 things. But, what are the things that you can do, right? And because what kind of minis game would this be without a whole litany of actions that you can take? Now, Paul, did you get to look over these at all or no? Did anything surprise, before I reveal them all, did anything here surprise you?
No, not really. Unless I missed something.
No, yeah, I mean, I don't think so either. So here's what they are. It's move, obvious, right? But now we get to talk about movement. A lot like MCP, except instead of 3 ranges of movement, there are just 2. Advance and dash.
So hold on. One thing I was just noticing. There's also jumping too.
So jumping is only we'll get there, but jumping only happens as a either a force ability, like it's a special ability to jump, or it's as a consequence of expertise. Right. It's not one of the standard actions. Jumping is actually not one of the standard things you can do.
Okay. So
it is always an ability.
I guess I got a little ahead on the sheet.
Yeah. Jumping is certainly a kind of movement. But it's not one of the when we talk about the 2 actions that you can take during a unit's activation, it's not one of those things.
Okay. Cool.
So those things are move. And so move can be either advance, dash, or climb. And we'll get into climb when we get into the different kinds of movement. So dashing is the shorter movement, and it looks like the short movement from MCP, and advance looks like medium movement. So those are from MCP. So those are your 2 movement styles. And then you can climb. And so climbing has to be a dash movement. And you have to be in range such that you can fully overlap the area that you climb. And then you can just climb up any vertical distance that you have of the type of terrain that can be climbed.
Right.
So that's basically how climbing works. They tried to keep it simple. I like that. This works well enough. It's basically the same as MCP too, right? Instead of it being like range 2 and climb, it's just you use the small movement tool. If you can climb, you can climb.
Right.
Also, you can't climb if you're engaged. We'll talk about that in a second too. Engagement is another thing that's in this game that's not in MCP. It's one of the biggest deviations of this game from MCP is that engagement is a real rule in this game. So another thing you can do on your activation is focus. And so if you focus, that means during the next attack made by each character in this unit, add 1 die to the attack roll. Because when you do this, I should note when you take an action, every model in the unit makes the action. So if you're acting one of those support units that has 2 bodies, they both get to move. They both get to focus. They both get to shoot when you take 1 action. So focus adds 1 die to the attack roll. Combat, just what it sounds like. You decide whether you're going to do a melee or a ranged attack, and you do the attack. You can use an ability. One thing to note in this game is all abilities are once per turn. That's actually explicitly called out in the rules. So any ability you read, all of those abilities can only be used once per turn. That's just like a hard and fast rule of the game. Once per turn, anything.
Well, that's interesting.
Which is different.
Yeah, usually you get to move twice in most games. That'll be...
No. Sorry, the ability is on your card face.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you were talking about like the abilities in general. It's like, whoa, usually you always get to move twice if you have it.
No, ability meaning using one of your active abilities on your card.
Gotcha. Misunderstood.
You're good. And those are that I actually like mistold. And those are all only once per turn. So here's another thing you can do. You can recover. And that's each character in the unit can heal one thing. And then the last thing you can do is take cover. And that's each character in the unit may be pushed range 1 and get a hunker token. And so what hunkering does is it gives you an extra defense against the next ranged attack coming at you. and hunkering stacks with cover.
Ooh,
that's
so cool. If you have a hunker and if you're hunkered 1 and you're in cover, you get 2 additional defense dice against shooting attacks.
I like it.
Yep. So those are the things you can do, and you get to do 2 things, right? So 2 things from that suite of things. And then you resolve the end of the turn. And we talked about the end of the turn because that's where injury and defeat work, right? You check to see if your injuries are equal to your total durability. And if they are, your character's gone. And you remove their card from the game for the rest of the game. And that's that. So do you have any questions from here, like at this point?
I do not.
Okay, so let's talk about the movement. So advance, we talked about basically you just move with the advance tool. Climbing, when a character climbs, it moves using the dash tool. That can overlap the terrain, and then you end your movement at any elevation. But again, you have to be fully overlapping it. Note that again, how I said you can't climb when you're engaged. You can also dash. Dashing is the short movement tool, and dashing is also, there's a lot of dashes that are built into expertise stuff in combat, which we'll get into. It's just a different, shorter style of movement, right? Jumping, which is a character, it's basically the same as climbing. It's just that there's no rule for engagement for jumping, because when you're jumping, it's not one of the 2. It's not like the same as a movement action. It's a totally separate thing that costs force, or you have to use expertise. Right. And then pushing and pulling. I don't want to get into pushing and pulling because it's very hard to explain without visuals. It's extremely hard to explain it without visuals. So if you want to know how pushing and pulling works, well, it works just like it does in MCP, and you should just go look at the book. I hate to be like, go read the book, jerks, but like you sort of have to look at you sort of have to you have to look at pictures of how pushing and pulling works. You're basically like it's really intuitive once you get to it, right? Because you're basically pushing or pulling a specific distance based on the push or pull. Now that's going to be noted on the ability. And then you use one of the range tools, you fold that into 90-degree angle and line it up with the thing that's moving. And then you have to move it within the parameters of that tool, either toward or away from the thing pushing or pulling. But it's much easier to see it than it is to explain. I think I actually explained it kind of well there.
I was just going to say, you did a terrible job of not even bothering to explain it.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm glad you said that.
All right. For me though, it's still like, I have no visual imagination at all. Do you know what I mean? I completely have no mental pictures at all. So it's really hard for me to like imagine it. So seeing it is much simpler than explaining it. So I still think it's better to look at pictures of it to see how it works.
Well, the thing about that, Kev, though, is that it's a great thing that they brought over from MCP, because
one of the best things.
It gives you more ability than most games in how you push things, right? Most games is just push directly towards
or directly away. Yeah.
And that's it. Whereas this gives you that angle to be like, well, I want them to come at me, but I don't want them quite right in my face. Or it also allows you to say, well, they're out of range of, this guy that I really want to kill them. So if I push them a little more like towards me, but more to the left, Anakin will be able to get them. So it gives you a lot more variety. It gives you a lot more options. And it's one of those things that's just a tiny change from what most war games do, but has a huge, huge, huge effect on the game.
Yep. Agreed. All right. But so we've talked about there's one more cool part about movement we haven't talked about, and that's ingress points. Chris, do you know anything about ingress points?
I don't.
Paul, do you know anything about ingress points?
I don't, but I know what ingress means.
Yeah, I mean, I know what ingress means. I have an idea.
So that gives me an idea.
Okay, so any ingress point in the game, be it if there's like an elevator or a lift or a ladder, if you end within range 1 of the ingress point, you teleport to the other side of the ingress point within range 1 of it. So if you're at the bottom of the ladder and you're within range 1 of the ladder, bloop, you're within range 1 of the top of the ladder.
Right.
Same with an elevator or a lift. And so that's really cool because it lets you do neat things with terrain. Like you could have a bunker that you say has an elevator to the roof. And this is where the elevator lets out, right? If you have that modeled on your terrain that they can run in and there's a little doorway. If they run in the bottom, they come out the doorway. Right. Super fucking cool. I really love it.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that. Just because that's how a lot of Star Wars works, right? Like you got to get in the elevator and then you got to go up.
Exactly.
So I mean, it only makes sense.
And especially when there's like, if you're going to have a lot of like multi-level terrain too, it makes sense that you have these ingress points that just make movement a little bit more easy and let you interact with the terrain that you've spent time customizing and talking about the rules for and putting down on the table and painting and all that shit, right? Just like gives you more out of your terrain. You can do more cool stuff.
Yep.
All right. So we're already going long. So the last thing I want to talk about is combat because we haven't talked about the combat system in the game at all, period, like zero. And the combat is like a whole other thing.
Mm-hmm. It is next level.
Right. Yeah. So, all right. So the first thing I want to talk about is engagement because it's such a drastic change from MCP where there's just no concept of engagement whatsoever. And I think for a lot of wargamers coming into MCP, that's very hard to get used to. But it's back, fellas. So a unit is engaged if it's within range 2, if it's on the same elevation, and it's in line of sight. Those are your 3 rules. If you meet those 3 classifications, you are engaged. If you are engaged, you can't climb, you can't shoot, and you can't advance. You can only dash. So
I mean, that all makes sense.
Amazing. I don't think it's as consequential as like giving attacks of opportunity and things that happen in games like Malifaux or Guild Ball,
right? Where
you're taking like disengaging strikes, but it still makes being close to other models of any consequence at all because it just doesn't matter at all in MCP and it makes some of the tactics so frustrating that you can't like gang up on stuff or cause engagement to mean anything. It's one of my least favorite parts of the game. So I'm just like so happy that engagement is back and engagement actually matters. It matters.
Right. And it really affects what you're doing. Mm-hmm. I do like the fact that, you can possibly jump out of combat too. Like that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. You could force jump out, right? Like whoop, peace. But like it also means that if you're, you can use someone to actually tie a model down. Like if there's an objective on the second floor and you can engage an enemy model to make it so they can't climb up. Like
that is a frustrating point that I had with MCP. So I'm glad that they brought that back.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's just
it allows for more tactical decisions, in my personal opinion.
It does. It's huge to me. It's like if I already said my favorite thing, this is my second favorite thing is that engagement actually matters in this game. Because it should matter.
So apparently, I don't really care about engagement because I don't think I ever noticed that there wasn't a rule for it in MCP.
Oh, dude, it's so frustrating that you can't like stop someone from moving out of a place or just like,
there's no penalty to it.
Yeah, there's no penalty. Like you can't stop any model from just double long moving out with an objective. Like, it's so stupid. So
I never even thought about it. I'll be honest with you.
I mean, maybe it matters less than I'm making it out to matter, but I mean, maybe not to me, right? It does matter. I think it just adds another level, like Potter said, another level of tactical decision making, and I'm way into it. But the next thing we have to talk about though is the rest of the whole combat situation, and so this shit is crazy. So the first thing we have to talk about is there's 2 kinds of dice, and yes, there are custom symbols on custom dice, but this is also a AMG/FFG/Asmodee style game. There's a lot of custom dice and tokens. You just have to accept that when you go into the game. So with that out of the way, the offense dice are D8s. The D8s are printed as such. They have 1 crit, 3 strikes, 2 expertise, and 2 failure. So if you're keeping track, that means the offense dice have a 50-50 percentage chance for success. That's 1 crit and the 3 strikes, 2 expertise, which we'll get into, and a 25% chance of failure. That is, for a person who likes to understand their dice probability, very smooth curve. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
D6s are broken into thirds. 2 blocks, 2 expertise, 2 failure. But just like the way, and if you've studied MCP dice, you know this is actually similar, is that the dice are actually weighted heavier to attack than they are to defense.
Yeah.
And it's the same here, right? You're rolling a different dice. And it's also important because it's not just the dice that make the difference. It's like a probability change. So here, you're a third to succeed on a block, a third to expertise, which we'll get into, and 2 failures. So a third failure, third success versus 50% success, 25% failure on the offense. So this is a game just like MCP that is much more weighted toward aggression, which I think is actually very important in a miniatures game because otherwise you have dirtling, and there's no dirtling to be done here because you're always at the advantage while you're on the attack generally.
Right.
Yeah,
which is something that a lot of miniatures games attempt to do and fail at.
Yeah, it feels very Legion-y to me in that aspect with the different attacks.
It is definitely. But I think the wrinkle here is the way that actually combat works is spicy. In Legion, it's cool, but in this it is very spicy. I don't want to get into stances yet because that's just like blows it into a whole other level. But what I will say is that you do have a stance card, and your character will either have 1 stance or 2 stances because it's a double-sided card. Now, each side of your stance has a combat tree, which we'll get into. It has melee and ranged stats for attack and defense, whether or not they have them. Like sometimes there's a dash, meaning they won't actually have one or the other. And then also expertise tracks. So when you look at one of these, they look very busy if you don't understand them. But what I'll say is the first time you look at this, you're going to go, woof, no thank you. But as soon as you understand it, you're like, this is actually a very pleasing and easy to read dashboard. And so it's very simple. And I'm going to break it down in the different sections. So the first section, which is your weapon abilities, melee and ranged. So the first thing you have is your 2 icons. It's pretty simple. A gun means you can shoot, and sabers means you have melee, right? And you have a number inside each dice face. That number is the number of dice that you roll in that kind of conflict. So if you're rolling for defense and you have a 6, you roll 6 d6s. If you're rolling for offense, you have a 7, you roll 7 dice. Simple.
Right.
Yep. Very easy to understand that. So now that you know that, we have to actually talk a little bit about how combat works. So when you roll your dice pool after the dust is settled, so there's just like MCP, there's a sort of rhythm to it. You like first assemble your dice pool, then you use abilities to modify your dice pool, then you roll your dice, then you use abilities to modify your dice. Once all that shit is done with, and I say that, and anybody who has played MCP understands that happens in a flash. You know what your model can do, and those things happen very quickly. It's just that the procedure is actually very well documented, and I want to make sure that we note that there's a good procedure for how all this works. But when the dust settles, go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say it's basically long division.
I mean, yeah, kind
right?
of.
Like, and not that you're doing long division, but it's kind of that same idea where there's like clear steps that you have to take.
There are clear steps, and sometimes you skip over steps because they're not relevant, but it's good to know that the steps are there and also critically where those steps are in the timing, right?
Exactly.
And I want to just make sure that people understand that that's actually explicit in a gorgeous timing chart in this instruction manual. But anyway, so you roll your dice. So let's say I roll my 6 dice, you roll your 6 dice, right? Now we're looking at the first thing I want to go over is the expertise track, because this actually is less dependent on what your opponent rolls. So in your expertise, you're going to have two sorts of expertise. And they'll note what they're for. And so I'm just going to use an example on one of Ahsoka's cards where she has her lightsabers. And so in her lightsaber expertise track, it says 1 or 2 does attack success. So that means if you roll either 1 or 2 expertise symbols, you get 2 successes added to your dice pool. Mm-hmm. Or basically you're adding the dice. The effect is you're adding 2 success dice. 3 to 4 means you add 2 critical success rolls. 5 expertise means you add 3 critical successes. And so that's what that means. And that's not as good as you think it is.
No, actually,
that means you rolled.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it was like you're reducing the amount of actual successes that you're getting in there.
Yeah, because you had to roll 5 dice to have those symbols.
And
exactly.
So if Ahsoka's attack is 7 and she gets 5 expertise,
and she rolls 5 expertise.
1 success.
Well, no, but here's the deal. 5 expertise means 3 crits, and crits can't be canceled by defense. They are guaranteed hits on the track. We'll get into that though. Crits are like the better successes.
Right.
Like strikes are regular successes and crits are super successes.
It kind of reminds me of the dice rolling phase in Chain of Command where you can figure out what you're going to be able to activate. And it's kind of the same idea where one of the numbers isn't necessarily great, but if you get a bunch of them, it can really help you out.
Yeah, and here I think the curve is really interesting because on every card that I've seen, 1 or 2 of them is like sweet. 3 or 4 of them is like hell yeah, it actually averages out my dice curve, and 3 of them is like woo, motherfuckers, were in there. So right. It's actually really cool the way it works. All right, so that's how expertise works on offense. And what I want to talk about now is the combat tree, because what you do is you take your total number of strikes and then you subtract a strike for every successful defense dice, for every block. So for every block on your opponents, you're going to remove a strike. Crits cannot be removed by strikes or by blocks. Sorry. Crits can't be removed by blocks. So you're going to have some number of successes at the end of this between 0 and however many dice you rolled, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so after you've done that, you have it sort of looks like a train map diagram on this, and that acts as a track for dice successes. So each one of these, you start in the orange square. That's your first success, is the orange square. And then you move down and you choose to go on these branching paths and add the successes as you go. So as an example, as we look at one of Ahsoka's here, she has on her first track, the first success she gets is she does 1 damage and a shove. And then from there, she can choose to either move up to heal twice or down to do another damage and a jump. And then depending on which track you have, you can go further and further and further down. And so if Ahsoka, for example, has 5 successes and goes down the bottom track, she will do a total of 6 damage to her opponent. There's 1 from the first square, 1 from the second square, and then 2, 2, and 2. And then there's additional pushes, shoves, and dashes, etc. And so what you're doing is you're taking your attack successes and allocating them. But what I'll be actually doing as I play the game is just pushing the dice on top of the symbols on the card to know where I am and what I've spent.
Right.
And I think that's probably what most people will do because it's like the best way to keep track of what you've done so far. Mm-hmm. But we also have to talk about defense expertise because when you're on defense, you also have expertise. And an example, the cool thing about, I haven't seen any offense expertise that do this yet. This is why, but defense expertise, some of them let you modify your opponent's dice. So for an example, Ahsoka has acrobatics on both of her stance cards. And acrobatics, so if she gets 1 defense, she gets 1 block, and she gets to change 1 offensive crit to a strike. if she gets 2 or 3, she gets 2 additional defense. She gets to modify a crit to a strike, and she gets to jump, right? Like, wow. And then it gets even more insane if she gets 4 defense, because then she gets 2 blocks. She gets to move a crit to a strike. She gets to jump and heal.
Sounds very Ahsoka-y.
Very Ahsoka-y. But you got to be pretty lucky, right? Because it's only a 3rd chance per expertise roll. But like that gives you the thing that I really like about this is that the dice give you lots of player agency. Because you roll your dice, and then there's probably going to be dice manipulation effects, and et cetera, et cetera. And so you can like know based on your combat tree and your stance, because now we'll talk about stances. So in these stances, some stances, if you think about it, it could be changing from one sort of lightsaber pose to another, or it could be changing from your lightsaber to your blaster. Right. Or whatever. If you're Bo-Katan, it could be changing from the dark saber to like a grapnel launcher or whatever. Right. Like there's like so many different things that like stances could go between. And you're allowed to switch once per activation. You can switch from one stance to another. So and it's important to know what stance you're in, because you have different defenses in your different stances too.
Right. Which makes sense.
Yeah, and so that's another part of the game, right? Like just like we're talking about like how we're sort of like stacking decisions in this game. So like having these multi-level, multiple changing objectives, having your units that have flexibility to go from one stance to another, and having the combat be it's not just deterministic based on the dice. Like I think even the lowliest units. So I'm looking at the B1 battle droids, and even the B1 battle droids, their first 3 offensive successes are always the same, but on the 4th, you always get a choice. So even the like lowliest of the low models has combat options and cool things that they can do. So I think that's neat.
Well, I mean, having played Arena Rex, I already come with a positive outlook on damaged trees.
Yeah, and I mean, this is basically like when we first saw them, I was like, I don't know if it's closer to Guild Ball or Arena Rex. It's much closer to Arena Rex.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the minute I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, this is because Guild Ball, gave you options, but it wasn't
you choose the top
like
or the bottom.
If you had gotten all of the options up till that point, right? That's the major difference, mm-hmm. right? Like you can choose which damage you do or which effect you do in Guild Ball, but Arena Rex, you get everything built up there.
Yeah, and so another thing to talk about how different these can be. If we look at the difference between the 2 Darth Maul stances, like one of Darth Maul's defense stances doesn't even have defense expertise. It only has offense.
As it should.
And the one that has offense and defense has 3 levels of branching paths. So it's not just like one branch or another. It's like it branches and then branches. So like these things are going to be like, we're talking about like that push and pull that the designers can do too, right? To make the models more flavorful. Giving these models the ability to have like very different trees of damage, and because the other thing I haven't even said yet is that this is also how you put negative debuffs on your opponents. Is that all of the debuffs are symbols in the combat tree. So like when you're looking at your combat trees, like you're going to have your jumps, your heals, your dashes, your shoves, etc. But you're also going to be able to do the abilities that debuff your opponent for their next activation, so that their melee or their ranged weapons break, or whatever it is that you're doing. There's like a bevy of these different status effects that you can apply. So it's just like MCP, where, an MCP, I think, launched with like 7 or 8 different debuffs, and now it's a much higher number. This game is shipping with a number of them as well.
Right.
It's 4 actually. So you have strained, disarmed, exposed, and pinned. And so each one of those, so like pinning, the next time this model would attempt to advance, dash, or climb, it doesn't. Instead, it loses the pinned condition.
Oh, jeez.
So, rough. Yep. And that's actually one of the things that Darth Maul does is pin. Exposed makes it so that they can't use defense expertise on their next defense roll. Yikes.
Gross.
Disarmed means you can't use attack expertise. And strained means the next time you move, you take damage.
Oh, wow.
I love it.
So, yeah. And you afflict those debuffs based on your combat tree. And that's the decisions that you're going to be making. Like, are you thinking to yourself, would I rather do more raw damage? Because when you're looking at the tree, that's often the choice. The choice is like 3 damage or 1 damage and disarmed. Like, which one of those is better as I continue down the tree? So it's consequential, right? The way you move down these paths.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the cool things that Arena Rex did is your decisions on what damage tracks you're taking really determines how that combat is going to go for you. And in this game, where it's very objective based, damage might not be the best option. Right?
Yeah,
the better option might be to push somebody or
to push someone off an
I'm
objective.
Engaged. Now I'm pushing
you got it.
out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because remember, you move the struggle tracker at the end of every one of your activations. So it behooves you to push your enemies off the objectives before the end of your activation.
Right.
And potentially get yourself on top of a different one, right? So it's very cool stuff.
Yeah, this is gonna be for a player like me who likes just to Hulk smash and just kill everything. This is gonna be difficult. It's gonna be like it literally is gonna be like playing Guild Ball all over again. Like I'm gonna have to retrain my brain to I just can't murder everything. I actually have to do other things.
Yep.
Oh,
you certainly are. All right, so rather than being like final thoughts, guys, I really want to I want to do room temperature. Like, where are you at on this game right now? Now that you have I think at this point, where we couldn't just set up and start playing. Because there are still some critical nuances. This is a dense rule book, and there's some very, very specific language that has to be understood and things that you need someone who really understands them. But you have a pretty good idea how to play it right now, and anybody listening probably has a pretty good idea how the game plays. And I'm really curious to know what your level of anticipation is of the game at this point.
I want to hear Paul's first.
Sure, that's fair.
Game looks great. Rules look great. I just don't have room for it.
Lie.
Yeah. How about you, Chris?
I've already pre-ordered the core box as well as one of the other boxes.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat as you, Chris. I'm actually selling games. I'm actually actively considering selling my Greyjoys. And quite a few other minis to make room for it, because really at this point in my life, I just want one miniatures game that I'm really into, that I like, that has some bright colors that I can paint and is fun to play casually. That's kind of really what I'm looking for. And it's never going to be hard for me. I'm never going to be Star Wars, boo. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just, it's actively something that I love to participate in. And so, it just seems like a pretty easy win for me.
Yeah.
And
I feel
everything about the system is good so far.
I feel I'm in the same boat as you. I've downsized pretty much, to a Soif, MCP, Legion, and Conquest. That's pretty much only.
But it's still a lot of games, right? I'm in the same boat. I'm it's still this, and this, and I just want to get down to one or two of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at getting rid of all of my A Song of Ice and Fire. The community here has pretty much died. No one's really playing the game. I may hold on to my Baratheons, but I mean, I'm probably going to get rid of all of them. Because I talked to Paul and I think I want to get down to just one sci-fi skirmish, one sci-fi mass battle, one fantasy skirmish, one fantasy mass battle. And the nice thing with Conquest is it knocks those two out with one game.
Yeah.
So I get Legion for my mass battle. I get Shatterpoint for that. And in my MCP, I'm downsizing to only mutants and Black Order. That's all I'm going to be collecting anymore for MCP. So again,
Nice.
I'll be able to condense that really smally.
Good. Yeah, and my goal is to go like full casual filth. Like I want to go down to Relic Blade, MCP, and maybe one or two other games.
Yeah.
So.
No, yeah, I'm definitely downsizing like you. I can't not see me not playing Shatterpoint in all honesty. As much as I was, hemming and hawing just because of the amount of games I had already. It fits exactly what I want it to be. It's Star Wars MCP that has learned from MCP. As well, is taking from other games, and so it fits a good place in what I want from a skirmish game.
Yeah, for me, the thing I want to say, and this isn't meant as a correction to what you said, but like for me, it's not necessarily MCP as a spot that they've learned. It's that they took the best parts that they lifted the parts from MCP that made sense to lift. And improved the parts that it made sense to improve, and then built totally new systems everywhere.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's a fair way to say it.
Because like I just am leery because people like, what is this, just another MCP? And it's really not, right? Like most of the systems in this game are dissimilar. The similarities are where it makes sense, like movement, pushing, pulling, the injured mechanic being upgraded, right? But like, and the verbiage and the timing charts and the way that the dice mechanics, like the timing of the combat, like the timing structure of combat is also very similar to MCP, even though combat itself is very different.
Right.
So I just think it's really cool. I think they've developed themselves a hell of a game here.
Yep, I agree. Paul's not going to have a say in playing it because I'm going to buy his Ewoks and he's just going to have to fucking play.
Yeah, man. How are you not going to play with Yub Yub? Let's go.
No, I have a couple of teams that I would be eyeing up. The only problem is the starter set.
Yub Nub.
Like I said, I'll just buy you Ewoks and you don't have to worry about the starter set in the terrain.
Yeah, man. You need it. And like, man, there's so many good packs coming out. I don't know, dude. I'm not gonna buy everything. I think that's probably
no. I learned my lesson from MCP and trying to Pokemon that shit. Like I will be getting the Inquisitor pack for sure. I think the Obi-Wan pack is the one that I pre-ordered as well.
Hello
as the
there.
Set. Yeah, the Hello There set. Like I'm not going to get Grievous like at all. Like I have zero desire to pick up Grievous.
It's so funny. That's so funny that you say that because the first two boxes that I ordered, I mean, you can guess them. It's the Dooku and the Grievous box.
Right.
Those were like my
favorite one out of the Clone Wars stuff is the Padme.
Oh man,
her box looks so cool. Like I probably won't pick her up, but it's a really cool box. Like I mean, Night Sisters for me are a given. I'm going to pick Night Sisters up.
Yep, same.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll pick up whatever box Hondo's in now that they've announced Hondo's coming to the game. I'll probably pick up the Cad Bane box.
Yeah, I mean, also the Luminara box is like 100% yes, because like that's something that I'll want to add to the core box forces.
Yeah, I hem and haw on Luminara because she's cool. I love her lore wise and like the fact that she was the one Shakti that did the clone training. But I mean I still like Luminara. And she comes with clone troopers. So,
but this is the cool thing, right? Because like we all get to have our different, and that's good. The clone troopers are a big part of it too, right? Because it's gonna like when I want to build a force around the Obi-Wan and Ahsoka models, it gives you just more options.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, the Plo Koon box is 100% for me. He is my favorite, non-main character Jedi. I love him.
Mega dope. Yeah. And basically anything that's Cad Bane related, I'm buying too, right?
Same
so
here.
Like,
I absolutely love Cad Bane.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that I want to make sure we run us out because we're running long. But yeah, it sounds like all three of us are in agreement that this seems like a pretty rad game. and that AMG has once again hit the mark.
I agree.
Yep. I think one of the important things is that this game is of the Filoni war, like Star Wars.
Yes.
Whereas Legion is more Skywalker Saga type Star Wars.
Well, I think that stuff is going to come into this game, right? But I think they're taking the Filoni aesthetic 100%.
Well,
I don't necessarily mean the models specifically. I mean the gameplay style.
Yeah, so I think like what Paul's saying is like where like Filoni was more like small skirmish battles, whereas Legion was the Skywalker Star Wars, the big epic battles.
The Hoth. Yes. Yeah, you're right. You're Yavin 4. You're right. You're 100% right, Paul. That is right on the mark.
Yeah. Yep. So, I mean, I think that's a good way to look at the different games and how they are different.
Yep. I agree with that. Cool.
Oh, also, I know we talked about this at the top of the show about how models might be released, and I just looked at the Ewok box, and the Ewok box is actually, it is 5 bases. It's the primary unit, and then the secondary is 2 models, and then the support is 2 bases with 3 models on each base.
Oh. Yeah.
So it's 5 bases, but 9 models.
Yeah, excited about those.
That's so cool. All right, anyway, who wants to read us out? Not me, please.
I heard Chris does.
Oh, man, I did it last time. Thank you to our patrons. You guys are awesome. Thank you to Static is the City for the music at the top and bottom of the show. Come join us on our Discord and follow us on the socials.
Bye.